So, just got to wait now for you lovely people to join. Get your coffee, get your book, and feel free to comment as we go along. But right now, I'm just going to wait because, hello! First person, who have we here? Oh, anonymous. Feel free to leave your name in as you come in. Tell everyone where you're from. Oh, 3 people. Hello, everybody. Welcome on board. Welcome on board to the Radetzky March. The Artsy Tiger. Hello there. 4 people now. Yeah, where you all coming from at the moment, and who have we got on? Leave us your name and your tagline. And also, if you've got a Bookstagram account or your own YouTube channel, feel free to pop a link down below if you want people to follow you, because anyone that's on here likes literature, and I'm more than happy for people to connect with other literature lovers through this channel. That's the whole purpose of this channel, really, is to chat literature and link literature lovers together. So we'll be hanging on just a few minutes so that we give time for people to come in. Mary Ann Carl, welcome Mary from Connecticut. What a lovely place to come from. I'm trying to think what I know about Connecticut now. There's bound to be something in the back of my mind buried. Hello from Poland. Hello V. Oh, how lovely to have you on. Poland and Connecticut. That's perfect. Wow, 5 people. That was quick. It is quick, considering this is only, what's the word? My second ever live, and I'm still not handling promoting it very well, but it's nice to keep it pretty contained anyway. Although if you want to recommend it to other people, that's fine, but the next one, they're going to have to have caught up 12 chapters and the rest. I can't remember where we're going from next. 13 to 17, I think it is. There you go. The Artsy Tiger has logged on. Just for those of you who are watching, that is my son. He's just curious. He's not read the Radetzky March. He's only 10. But maybe one day, if I can convince him. That's good. So what times is it where you are? So right here, it's 8 o'clock. So I'd imagine Connecticut, what's that, 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Maybe 2? Approximate. Poland, what are you? 3 hours ahead, maybe. So, yes. Thank you, Mary. That's brilliant. 9 o'clock. Oh, okay. Not too bad. You're only an hour ahead. That's great. I suppose that makes sense, really. It seems so far away, Poland, but it's not really, as the crow flies. Not with a plane, anyway. That's grand. How have you been getting on with the Radetzky March? I normally let this go to about 5 to 6 minutes before I really kick off. It gives people time. I was actually slightly late logging in, so some may have gone and come back. Enjoying it. I'm pleased you are. I really am too. I can't wait to talk about this one. This book has really knocked 1 for 6, as they say. It's got right amongst me. Some of the writing. It's like poetry. Oh, can you hear me clearly as well? That's the other thing. I mean, you are responding to my comments, but I think this is the highest I can crank my volume. My normal YouTube videos are done on a proper camera, but doing lives, I've not worked out how to, what's the word? How to sync up the camera. Oh, I'm not synced, you see? Right. That's a shame. I'm not sure whether that's just our internet connection. If you can hear, that's one thing. But, right. I'm going to try something. See how this sounds. Let me know. I'm live. How does it sound now? Is it synced? Is it okay? Or does it sound tinny? I'll wait for your response. Hello, whoever's just come in. Not synced at all still. Okay, it's not the microphone then. It's it must be internet and server connections that are playing up. Sorry about that. Hopefully it will sort of rejig itself as we're going along. Welcome on board, everybody else. I'm just plugging in a microphone. So that should still be working. Right. That should still be working now. And it may take a while to resync wherever you are. So who else have we got on there? We've got Mary Ann, we've got V from Poland. Who else is there? We've got Artsy Tiger. Hello, number 7, just come in to join us. That's great. I'm just waiting just a few minutes just to let everybody get in on time. And then we're going to kick off with our wonderful, wonderful book. And I've got to admit, I love this design here. Love it. Has everyone got this design, or have you got some of the... Hello, Richter Ulrich from Germany. Ulrich, nice to meet you. Oh, I envy you. You get to read the Radetzky March in German, which I would love. Because some of the words in this is so magnificent that I can only imagine what it's like in its original language. A few more have come in. Welcome, welcome, one and all. We're just introducing ourselves, where we're from. So feel free to join in. And as we go along in the discussion, please feel free just to throw in comments. And normally what I did last time is whatever I was saying, I just stopped and read the comments. And, you know, that can lead the conversation a little bit. But I do have 2 things that I'll be talking about primarily from these chapters that we've just read. But at any point, feel free to just throw something in there, what you've got out of it. I've already heard a couple of good comments on our Instagram group. Next read along that I do, I don't mean the Radetzky March, because that's set up now. But if you want another read along of another book, maybe next month, I'll happily carry on with this. But I've found a place to set up a discussion group where more than 15 people can join. So it's called Discord. And I'll tell everyone how to get hold of it. Right. Oh, by the way, if you fancy doing another read along, you know, feel free to suggest books. And as long as they're classics, since that's what my channel is. Okay. So we've had another person come in. Right. We're 7.5 minutes since starting. I think we're pretty much ready to kick off. Anyone else got coffee? I've got the most manly cup here that I'm drinking from. Right. So, how did you get on with chapters 7 to 12 of Radetzky March? I mean, I thought it was just outstanding. And once again, if I happen to not look at the camera at times, it's really odd for me. I'm used to looking into a proper camera lens, which will be dead in front of me. Of course, my mobile is slightly off center. So if I look like I'm not looking at you, I'm not being rude. I'm just, I'm getting confused with camera angles. Right. So there's a whole bunch of things that are in this book, the section we've been reading. And if there's anything that particularly stands out to you, throw it on screen, give us a comment, and we'll run with it and see what other people think as well. But I don't know if you noticed, because I did, when I spent some time thinking about it, that there are two really fundamental ideas that seem to be going on in these chapters, and that they sort of build upon the original 6 chapters, but it's becoming more clear to me what's going on. And it really is Roth's elegiac to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the loss of a beautiful past, a nostalgia, a melancholy reminiscence for a bygone world, but also sort of the almost spiritual ideal. This is also found in here. We'll talk about it in a minute, but there's a spirituality engaged in this section, which turns not just an old world from nostalgia, but it shows us that the empire of Austria-Hungary was almost a religious ideal. And this really jumps up. It's almost that Roth is seeing the ideal of empire was great, it brought some good things, but it was like a religion that had lost its meaning and just had its traditions left. I don't know if that makes sense to you, where people can enjoy sort of the baubles and fripperies of maybe a beautiful cathedral and statues and whatever, but are not bought into the actual belief system itself. And obviously that's going to rot things from the inside. It's going to decay slowly. Now, chapter 7, I don't know about you, chapter 7 I thought was awesome. Chapter 11, hello Siam. I've been doing very well. And in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, wow, love from, well, mine's a village, so it wouldn't really make much sense, but love from Wales in the UK. It's such a small village, you wouldn't find me on the map. So we're just saying that in chapter 7, there's this brilliant piece. It's almost a fully allegorical chapter. Did you notice how it presaged World War One? This is the chapter in which we find Dr. Demant is pulled into a duel that he doesn't want to fight with, what's his name? Is it the Major Tattenbach? And it's all through a misunderstanding. This is what I find remarkable. But just before we get to it, is the first 2 words of chapter 7 are sublime. They're brilliant in setting up a mental disposition for what you're about to read. And the 2 words are, winter came, full stop. So, hello, nice to meet you too, les Galousières, if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm guessing you're France then. So winter came. Now, this is significant because the previous chapters, oh, right. Okay. So books about the First World War. So if you want to go for novels, then I would suggest something like Storm of Steel by Ernst Younger. All Quiet on the Western Front, the classic by Eric Remarque. A Farewell to Arms would be another good one. If you want a background for real history, not fiction, go for A.J.P. Taylor's The First World War. Brilliant discussion of how it started. So we're moving into a winter section, not just literally, but metaphorically. This is a demise now of the Habsburg Empire. We're definitely moving towards it. In just a page and a half, we have some of the cadets there, the officers, saying that they were all going to have an assignation with death within a couple of years. You'll notice, well, if it's literally a couple of years, then that places this part of the tale at 1912. But it may just be a turn of phrase, a couple of years. So we're at least at in the very early part of the 20th century. And we start with this problem. We start with Taitinger, another major, talking with the officers about an event that's happened. And that event is that Dr. Demant has been told by a drunk officer, Tattenberg, that his wife is going around with Trotter, Karl Joseph. And Demant tries to push the idea away. He says, you're drunk. He actually says, you're plastered. But this officer has said, I'd watch your wife if I were you. You know, saying basically that he's been cuckolded. And of course, all that's happened is Demant had argued with his wife at the theatre, stormed out, and when she came out, she had no one to walk her home, and Karl Joseph was there. And, you know, his sense of nobility, noblesse oblige, was, I've got to walk her home. And he walks past the officer's mess, and bang, everyone sees him with Dr. Demant's wife, and of course, they add 2 and 2 and get 5. And what's interesting now is, to secure his honor, even though he's not interested in a duel, Demant has to challenge Tattenbach to fight, you know, drawn pistols at 7:20 the next morning. And he doesn't want to do it. But it's the rigid ideal of honor within the Habsburg monarchy which demands this. Otherwise, he's going to be disgraced. And because Trotter is the guy who's sort of instigated it by mistake, he has to become the second to Dr. Demant. And he says in his letter to his father, he says, I may end up having to join the duel myself. If Tattenbach lives, I'll have to fight him as well. And this leads us into sort of the ridiculous nature of the ideal of honor, heroism, militarism, what the empire has come to stand for. You think about when in the early pages, the hero of Solferino, the original trotter, his story was changed, so it was more martial, more glorious. Everyone's supposed to live up to this ideal, and we'll come to a sort of a religious ideal later when we're talking about this. And it's so reminiscent of the First World War's outbreak. I think Roth is writing this in 1932. So think of how First World War started. There was a lot of honor at stake. Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke, was shot, wasn't he, by, what's his name, Gavrilo Princip in Serbia. And that was the Serbian sort of nationalists wanting to break away. And then Austria had to lean on Serbia and threaten it, and it gave them an ultimatum to defend its honor. But Serbia had to turn down a little bit of the ultimatum, just 2 clauses, to defend their honor. And they ended up in a duel, essentially. A duel which nobody wanted, but was inevitable. And the amazing thing, there's a section here. When the officers are hearing about this inevitable duel that comes along, do you notice how none of them want it? None of them do. It says, let's have a look. Depending on what, if you've got this copy edition, then we'll be on page 101. If not, we are 1, 2, 3, it's about 4 pages in. It says this, and this is really telling. They all saw and expressed as much by murmurs and nods. Not only had they understood the story of the lieutenant, that's Trotter, walking home Frau Demant, they knew it from beginning to end, if not inside out. And still they asked him, that's Officer Tatenberg, to tell it over and over again, because in their secret and foolish heart of hearts, they hoped the lieutenant's story might somehow come out differently once, and leave a chink of hope for a more favourable outcome. And yet, it says not the tiniest of its sad details ever changed. Now that is a remarkable bit of insight into what Roth's talking about, as far as I can see. They hear this sad tale that's led the Dr. Demant and one of the officers to go to a duel, and they ask for the story to be repeated and repeated and repeated in the hope that some detail will come out which can exculpate the dishonor and can stop a duel from happening, because they don't want to lose either of their comrades in a foolish duel over honor. It was started, because someone was drunk. Now, this is so interesting because of something that comes later. Do you know in chapter 12, you notice the high focus on gambling. They set up that roulette table, don't they, out in the Silesia, the distant, most remote parts of the empire. Now, on an individual level, you see, what's his name? Major, or is it Captain? Captain Wagner. He's the one who gets into serious debt, and he talks about the roulette wheel going round, and he develops all these curious idiosyncrasies, superstitions, like when he plays Baccarat, he shuffles the cards with his left hand. And sometimes he tries to plead with a particular suit of cards, like hearts, so that it will come out in his favour. And other times he has to act reserved, as if he doesn't care what card will come out, in order to pull forth the luck of the gambling rooms. Just comment if you remember the bit I'm talking about. This is in chapter 12. Why that's interesting is because in chapter 7, that's what these officers are doing when listening to the story about Dr. Demant. They're asking, spin the wheel again. Tell us the story again. Maybe it will come out different this time. But it's a game of roulette. This spirit of honor in the empire, just, it's like the hand of fate spins and brings people to its demise. And I found that really interesting. And one of the ways the officers try and get out of it, remember one of them says, oh, it's Major Tattenbach's name day. which means if you were named after a saint, if that saint has a particular day in the year, that's called your name day. You celebrate it with the saint. And they're hoping that because Tattenbach's accused Demant, or said Demant's been cuckolded by his friend Karl Joseph, that's led to the duel. But these officers saying, well, it was his name day, he's allowed to get drunk and nothing counts on this day. That's just superstitious nonsense. They're looking for a get out. Just like later you have Captain Wagner, and you suspect Trotter will as well, getting into debt, but building superstitions, hoping he can influence the spin of the roulette table, the draw of the cards in Baccarat. But it's nonsense. It's just superstition. You are purely down to luck and fate at this point. And I find that brilliant that he set this up, because all of the nations of Europe fundamentally didn't want World War I to happen. They wanted the old order to continue, but they were sucked into this war against almost everybody's will. And there's an interesting word used. You don't find this word very often in literature. I don't know if I underlined it, but see if I can get it. The word is numen. Here it is. I know this is jumping 6 chapters ahead from chapter 7, but it's linked. Talking of Captain Wagner, it says his usual game was Baccarat. Again, in this edition, page 197. His usual game was Baccarat, even though it was not only banned, but even held in scorn. But then what good to him were games that made you reckon odds and think? Think and reckon sensibly. Notice that, sensibly rather than superstitiously. When his speculations tended to the incalculable and the inexplicable numen, sometimes actually revealed it and occasionally even forced it into submission. Now, a numen is like a divine providence, the spirit of a place that rules over it, very localized divinity, as it were. So you have the numen of the gambling rooms, this spirit that people think is in charge there. They pay homage to the Lady Luck, and people develop their superstitions in order to win her favor. But that, you find, is what Roth senses happened with World War I. Everyone didn't want it to happen, just like no one wanted Max Demant to fight Tattenbach. But there was almost a numen, a divine providence pushing everything along. Hello, Adal from Morocco. Nice to have you with us. So do you get that? This chapter 7 seems to be almost allegorical. There is a fate, a destiny, a dark destiny, which is pulling Max Demant to his death in a duel he doesn't want. Likewise, the Habsburg monarchy at the beginning of the 20th century, particularly from 1910 onwards, it was weak, it was degrading, and then suddenly it was pulled into this sort of maelstrom of political intrigue that it could not cope with, which ended up in a war it didn't want, nobody wanted, but for the sake of honor of nations, that's why it all took place. I mean, that's remarkable how Roth has put that together. And there's a bunch of other things that come along in chapter 7 that really point all this out. Again, a number of the officers' names, you'll recognize them as being Slovak, Czech, Hungarian, Polish, Ruthenian or Ukrainian. There's Madame Ressi, who owns the bordello. She's Greek. This is all the different nationalities under the Habsburg monarchy. Did you notice that? And symbolic of that is Max Demant being a Jew who didn't have an actual country. If you think of the Jews, there's 17 nationalities in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, but the Jews didn't have an actual nation. For Roth, when the Habsburg monarchy, Austro-Hungary, fell, he literally lost his country of birth. He lost his fatherland. And so Max Demant, it's very interesting. He stands for those, or seems to stand for those who are not actually the elite of Austro-Hungary. And he fights against Tattenbach. And what you get there is the Austro-Hungarian Empire versus almost the Balkans nationalists, which is what led to the war in the first place, this duel between what started with Serbia and Austria. Well, this duel is between Max de Mant and an Austrian officer. Interestingly as well, Max de Mant is a Democrat. He already doesn't think too much of the emperor, as we've seen in previous chapters, but he's fighting a duel with someone who is loyal to the empire, who belongs to the empire as part of the Austrian military. So there's this link. It's almost foreshadowing what would happen in Europe. And the amazing thing is when they get up the next day, the barracks, they go marching, and there's a very interesting comment made about the way they march. In the Instagram group, a lot has been observed about the tramping of feet, the clicking of heels, and the rattling of spurs, because the Radetzky March, that tune by Strauss, when it was first played, the troops started stamping their feet and clapping their hands, and that's a tradition that stays till today. So having the sound of feet tramping is linking the militarism and the glory. Oh, hello, Marion. Nice to see you. By the way, everybody, if you haven't been to Marion H's YouTube channel, she is fantastic. We're just discussing the Radetzky March. Now, going about that tramping, it brought the military into the anthem. But when they find out about the duel, look what it says. It says they slunk away almost silently. Their spurs failed to jingle, their swords did not rattle, their boots crept silently over a silent surface. Well before midnight already, the mess was deserted. Now, isn't that telling? The Radetzky March, linked to the jangle of equipment, weapons, the stamping of feet, the grinding of gravel, the clicking of heels, which we've had all the way through the beginning, is suddenly silent because of this duel. The idea of the honor and militarism of empire and emperor doesn't make sense in this situation. The honor has led to unnecessary danger, which will lead to two people dying, as we know. And so where is the grandness of the old empire? When people went into World War One, it wasn't going to be as grand as before, as they soon came to find out. And Trotter, Karl Joseph, he makes a comment to his father in a letter, which I find remarkable. Now, I don't know whether I'm overreading this one, but the whole chapter does seem to link to me very clearly the sound of how the First World War broke out. And in his letter, because of getting Max de Mant in trouble into this duel, he writes, "Dear father," he began, "I seem quite innocently and unwittingly to have precipitated an affair of honour." Well, think of somebody else who was the son of an important person who precipitated an affair of honour. It was none other than Franz Ferdinand, Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, it wasn't his fault that Gavrilo Princip shot him, but that innocent and unwitting trip, I think it was to Belgrade, precipitated a huge affair of honour. And we have World War One. So it's really telling that Lieutenant Trotter says this to his father, because we know that the hero of Solferino, his granddad, that image and the image of Franz Joseph the Emperor keep coming up in the story, and they seem to be a mirror of each other. So it wouldn't be surprising that, as he's the offspring of the hero of Solferino, he's pointing out that the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the offspring of the Emperor, precipitated a matter of honour. And this, to me, I just found it just outstanding. And it just carries on. Suddenly the soldiers are more worried about war. They've been brought up on war. They've thought about honour. They've thought about marches. They've thought about the emperor. But now that this duel is coming, actual threat of death, they're not so sure that the honour's worth it. And like we say, but they try to get hold of it, don't they? And so that was one of the great things in this book. And of course, it was then Max and Karl Joseph's conversation. How painful was that last evening of them together, where they had 6 hours left. They knew Max was going to die. It's almost like people had got into an inertia and ennui with the Habsburg Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was destined to die. It was already in decline with all the raising up of the nationalist movements in various countries. It was a foregone conclusion, you know, a resignation to a fate that was destined to come. Just like Max, as soon as he knew about the duel, he talks about himself in the past tense. He speaks as if he is already dead. And then he just makes this great few comments. I mean, there's some passages, but just exquisite. Just the writing could be talked about. But I want to read. It's just so much. The way Karl Joseph says to him, "I don't want you to die." But before he can say that, when they're leaving Frau Ress's, the bordello, he says, "Put this on." He says, "I don't want you to catch cold." I mean, he doesn't want him to catch the cold of death, which he will soon have the next day. And interestingly, we get a very telling comment in Frau Ress's, actually. Remember in Frau Ress's bordello, in chapter 6, I think it was, he saved the picture of the emperor because they were all, you know, being rather fornicating and everything in front of the emperor, and he saved it. When he goes back to Frau Ress's this time later, he says he's in the back, he's in the kitchen, and he sees the picture there, and he's like, "Why is it here, not in the main room?" And it just says, "The landlord doesn't feel like proving he's a loyal subject anymore." Notice that. Now, this is Greek, so we're going down the Balkans. And he's saying people within the empire, which used to collect them under one identity, no longer relate to the emperor. They don't want to belong anymore to an empire. And the reason for that comes out a little bit later and is the second really telling point about the whole book. But just before we get there, you see Roth's attitude to fighting, to war. And remember, the First World War built upon honor, ultimately. You know, powerful monarchies, powerful empires. Just think, the First World War, by the way, unlike any other wars in 20th century, Britain ruled by a king, Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, Russia had Tsar Nicholas, and Austro-Hungary had Franz Joseph. And you also had the King of Serbia as well. So this was a time of kings, honor, nobility, the old way of things. And then Max, he muses, doesn't he? He says, "Tomorrow I die like a hero, a so-called hero, in total opposition to the beliefs of my forefathers and my race." Remember, he's Jewish, so he's talking about the Torah. In one of the old books he read, there is a sentence, "Whoever raises his hand against his fellow man is a murderer. Tomorrow someone will raise a pistol against me and I will raise a pistol against him, and that will make me a murderer." Now, that is some potent writing. What he's saying here is killing is murder. Whether there is honor or not, it is murder. And how absurd to be drawn to murdering a person over being slighted, over your personal feelings of honor, not letting it go. And he harps on this theme again and again, because he says, he comes to think about it, on page 115, he says, "It seemed perfectly possible to him that he might still elude all the threats to himself. Vanish, he thought, accept dishonor, relegation to the ranks, serve 3 years as a private, or run away abroad, not be shot." And then he says to Karl Joseph, the cretinous stupidity of it. "The honor that's invested in the silly tassel hanging on your saber. You're not permitted to walk a woman home. Can you see how stupid that is?" And he just says 2 words, bloody lunacy. It's a play on words, isn't it? It's swearing, because Max doesn't normally swear, but also what would happen in World War II is the most sanguine of wars up to that point, only exceeded by World War II. So it was bloody lunacy, all based on this ideal of the empire. So that was one part, but this hand of fate is quite significant too. It's almost like the whole thing, Max can't get out of it, Karl Joseph can't work out a way out of it, the officers don't want it to happen, but they can't get out of it, and World War One and the demise of the Habsburg monarchy couldn't get out of it. It was the Neumann of the time. Just like later, Captain Wagner is governed by the Neumann of the gambling house, where he's at the whim of the fates, as it were. So, there is something else. That's all in chapter 7. But there is another idea that comes up here, and I mentioned it sort of being spiritual. Joseph Roth, you can tell as he's reading this, he fondly remembers his old fatherland. There is a great deal of nostalgia. There's a little portion where Franz Trotter, the dad, gets off the train. I wonder if I can find it. And it's only a silly little sentence, really, but I thought it was very telling. There was a nostalgia to it, which was outstanding. Talks about him getting off. This is in chapter 11, right near the beginning. This is when, hello from Barcelona, hello Olga, and other stories. Oh, I take it you have a YouTube channel there. Please, everybody, go and check out Olga. Leave a link below if you need to. That'd be great. So, remember, Franz goes to visit Karl Joseph when he's moved away to the extremities of the empire, which is very significant because where would the first clash of the war take place? It's between Austro-Hungary and Russia, and that's where he's now based. It's also, by the way, where he moves to is actually Joseph Roth's homeland in Poland, Galicia. But when Franz Trotter gets there, it talks about the way he gets off the train. He says, calm and alert, he climbed down from the steps with that suppleness of stride that the newspapers used to single out for mention in the old emperor, and which had gradually been copied by a number of elderly civil servants. Because there was in the monarchy at that time, a very distinct, now completely forgotten way of stepping down from railway trains and carriages, of entering restaurants, platforms and private houses, of approaching friends and relatives. A type of stride that was perhaps also determined by the tight trousers of the elderly gentleman and by the elasticated trouser loops that many of them liked to wear over their boots. It was a particular walk. That is, do you get that sort of pathetic nostalgia? By pathetic, I mean pathos, feeling, melancholy. Because he remembers a particular way that old gentleman would get off a train. There was a correct way to get off a train, to walk into a restaurant, to introduce yourself. There's something fine about that. There's something worthy about that. A higher ideal to live towards. An etiquette which raises us from just being beasts. And Roth is spotting this, and he's remembering it fondly. And this is what makes this book so heartbreaking for me, is he can clearly remember some of the good that came from the empire. It did have its good points, but it faded. And the reason for that is because it was an ideal. It was, I think Roth actually said himself of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, not in this book, but of himself in a note. He said, it wasn't political, it was religious. The ideal of empire was religious for Austro-Hungary. 17 nationalities are all bound together under the ideal of a one united people that could bring peace, that would hold harmony, all focused on emperor. I mean, today that happens. People, they want the globalist kind of society, get rid of all borders. The ideal is quite nice. In practicality, it didn't always work because we see the decadence and the incongruities and the hypocrisy that is in the empire. And of course, people are going to revolt against that. But the ideal was magnificent. In fact, in one part of the chapter 8 or 9, it calls it tawdry. So tawdry it's got the pretense of brilliance. And you could see that through the officers. It always talks about their clothing being so beautiful and this sense of honor. The ideal looks beautiful, but it's been hollowed out. And that is specifically mentioned, I've got to remember where now, that's specifically mentioned by Colonel Koznicki, I think is how you pronounce it, Count Koznicki. When he first talks, do you remember, he says the empire is doomed. He's talking to Karl Joseph's father, Franz. And his father can't quite get his head around it, but he knows he's hearing the truth. Now, I'm just looking desperately to find where that statement is. If you can find it for me, it'd be great. Just flick through. If I can't find it, it doesn't matter. Basically, one of the things that Count Koznicki says is, look, the empire is doomed. He refers to the emperor as Franz Joseph, showing a very democratic way of speaking. He knows all the different nationalities are wanting to break away from Austro-Hungarian rule. But then he makes a comment explaining it to Karl Joseph's father, Franz. He says, people have stopped going to church, so they don't believe anymore. Now, why does that matter? Because Franz Joseph, the emperor, is called the apostolic king or apostolic emperor, or his apostolic highness. In other words, he is divinely ordained. His right to rulership comes from God. And this ideal of God's ruler on earth, God's kingdom, as it were, holds everybody together. Tiger. Freedom and liberty. Where is your freedom and where is your liberty? It's very true. Where is your freedom and where is your liberty? Because for a lot in the empire, where was their freedom and where was their liberty? It used to be bound up with emperor, and people were proud. That's why at the beginning, everyone's got a picture of the emperor because they're bought into it. But now they don't go to church. So there's no divine right of an emperor. So now, democratically, how can he rule? He can't. People are losing faith in it. This is an age of skepticism. And remember, that was mentioned about Max Demand. He was called a bookworm, but in a noble tone. In chapter 6, I think it was. A bookworm, it was said as if, with as much relish as if the word dragoon had been stated. And so that tells you the ideal of empire beginning to crack. And when we say the ideal, it's a spiritual ideal because it's linked to church. People want to live up to it. And this is the problem. What Habsburg monarchy has now got is the honor, the militarism, the paraphernalia of empire, like a church, like a religion. It's got its belief system. It's got its central idea. It's got its icon in Franz Joseph, the emperor. It's got its regalia and uniform in the military. It's got its story of great people in the past, its prophets and its saints, for argument's sake, with generals and the like. But nobody lives it. It's just the vestures of a belief with no real faith. And that's why you get this tumult in the book. The officers feel they belong to something, but also feel floating at the edges. The sons feel the sense of obligation to the fathers, but don't understand. And they need the fathers to help them out. And the fathers don't understand that the kids need propping up. They need to be given direction beyond just be honorable, be obedient. Because the sons now don't have the faith in the empire. It's just like a catechism that's repeated with no meaning. And there's this disenfranchisement is glaring, because you see that break between father and son, and it's painful. The fathers want to love the son. Franz says he wanted to call out as he was leaving on the train, "I love you, son," but he couldn't do it. Why? Because the ideals of empire had built to such strict rigidness that he couldn't show that. That's not what you do. And yet that's what was necessary. And interestingly, well, that's what pulls it all down. The family is breaking because of it. And it's also what breaks the empire. Yeah, thank you, Marion. The sense of spirituality. I didn't spot it straight away, but just mulling it over, there was something in there. There was a desperation from Roth's writing. He couldn't work out why exactly the monarchy fell, the dual monarchy. But it did. It seemed fated to happen. But then you see he recognizes that the belief in it had gone with the age of skepticism. And the youngsters, they were doing it because it's like saying you're a Catholic or a Baptist or whatever because your mum and dad were. But that doesn't have root. And yet it's going to lead them over a precipice into World War I. It's going to lead to the complete collapse of Trotter's family. You can just see it coming. There's many allusions to it. I did have something else in my mind and it's just slipped. It's having hard doing a live, trying to keep going. If you want to chip in, anybody, about your own observations, I'll pick up on them as well. One person to definitely come to, what did you think of the chapter on Jacques? Oh my days, that was a great chapter. There is a message of the religious aspect of the old world, the ideal of empire in that. Do you remember when Jacques is dying and Franz goes in to see him and sits by the bed, talks to him a little bit? Do you remember what Jacques asks for? I'll give you a couple of seconds to type. Jacques asks to see something. See if anyone will. It's a death, as in today's religion. Yeah, it's right. It's a dying ideology, a dying belief system. I want to mention that right at the end of this. But Jacques, while he was lying on his bed in his little building house, Franz comes in and Jacques says, I would like to see the hero of Solferino. Now, who does the hero of Solferino depict? Who's his counterpart? It's Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria. Obviously, hero of Solferino is the original Trotter. When that picture is brought in by Franz, where does he put it? He puts it next to the table, next to the image of Mary, the Virgin. It's sort of anointed with holy meaning. And since the hero of Solferino is a depiction of Franz Joseph, it's this belief system, this almost holy order that people belong to, the apostolic highness. And think of how Karl Joseph responds to all situations. Who does he think of? He thinks of the hero of Solferino, his granddad. He looks up to it. What would he do? That question is specifically asked. What would the hero of Solferino do now? That's almost like people saying, what would Jesus do when they're in a situation? What is the course of action that I must take? And sort of an out-and-out truth, the divine right. And Jacques epitomizes this because Jacques is older than Franz. Jacques worked for the original Trotter, the Baron Trotter. He worked for him when they're at their height. And what does that mean? Do you notice how it affects Franz? As he thinks of Jacques dying, he says, if Jacques can die, then maybe Franz Joseph can die. And what you have, it's just so beautifully put. I mean, wasn't it just glorious, the whole thing with Jacques? It was like capturing a moment of life in a snow globe. It was not necessarily a great moralizing point in a story. It was just this moment of life of an old man who had his past that he remembered. And how he had been dubbed. It's also fear-based. Yes. Yes, there is fear based in that because you have the image as well, don't you, where he believes the hero Solferino is riding to come and collect him. And Franz is very uncomfortable. And then it's like the recognition that it's a bygone age. That's what really sort of resounds off the margins of the pages. It's a bygone age. It's about to pass. And then what happens to Jacques? He rallies out of nowhere. I mean, it completely takes Franz by surprise. He suddenly gets this surge of energy, sits up. Sergeant Slamer's there as well. And that's all the old guard. And they go to give Jacques his real name back. There's a comment also made, I know this sounds disparate, but they're related. There's a comment also made about the emperor that he's not all that backward. He has tried to adjust the government to fit the democracies. It's like getting a new name. But Jacques says, when I'm dead, please put my name, Jacques, on my gravestone, because that's who I am. And when he rallies, they suddenly try to reinvent him, giving him a new name, but then he drops dead. It was too late to change, far too late to change. And what's lovely is Franz goes down every now and then and gives sugar to the canary through the cage. The canary, have you noticed the reference to birds? So much to do with birds. Someone's just mentioned liberty. Birds and liberty fit together in literature very well. They are free. The canary was even allowed to hop out of the cage and stand at the edges. You know, it went to the window, but it would keep coming back. The canary was bathed in light and sunshine. It was warm, something that's not happened in the book. It's always cold. Even in summer, in chapters 2 to 5, it talks about the cold light. There's this beautiful, honey-coated nostalgia. You know, it talks about the golden hour of the evening as it slants across the roofs and paints them gold. It's this capture of the perfect past, youth, the things you were fond of. And Franz suddenly wakes up to that. And the fact that Karl Joseph then becomes infantryman is going back to where the original granddad was. They hearken for the peasant's life. That's very interesting. Ultimately, the comfort of living your ordinary life in the empire was great. But the massive monument, the edifice, the spire of the ideal, the religious ideal of what empire stood for, has become overbearingly heavy and unwieldy, and it can't adjust, and it leads, yeah, things are all gone. That's it. You've said it way better than me, Myra. Things are all gone. The ideal that was there is gone. People don't have it anymore. And the Radetzky March is not heard. Instead, what you get when you go to the bordello, when he's talking with Demant, Karl Joseph and Demant, you hear the clashing of plates and the tinkle of jingles outside, of bells outside. It's, instead of the Radetzky March, it's become a dismembered ensemble of sounds. It's all broken apart. But Roth is looking back, and that moment with Jacques is when Franz sees it too. His past, the happiness, the ideals. When Karl Joseph talks about the way his father gets off a train, there were good things in the empire. There were happy moments. But the Numen, the divine spirit of the age, was drawing the world into destruction. And what's awful when you think about it is this empire. Yeah, it's a distant thought. It's a glorious but distant thought. And in this book, what you're getting is Roth doesn't over-romanticize. He paints all the muck and grit and dirt and vice and nonsense that was there. But also, he doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, the whole thing was useless. Yeah, it had its big problems, but it also was a great ideal for binding. Now, remember, Roth is in 1932, he writes this. The Nazis have come to power. He flees to Paris. Europe looks on the brink of disaster again. And one thing you could say about the empire is it managed to hold together a whole bunch of different nationalities, the ideal. But that's broken. And even the children can't revolt yet because they, I mean, if you read literature, read something in the year 1910, a novel, and read something in the year 1921. And you look at the difference of attitudes of the young towards the old generation. Right here, reminds me in a way, in the US 60s, 70s, Vietnam, questioning the war, hippies. Yeah, you see, there was a great divide in generations. Think of those who went to the Second World War, absolute honour, to carry martial arms for the Stars and Stripes, but not by Vietnam, especially by the late 60s. That was all broken. There was, and the disconnect within the generations as well was the same. But back then, in Carl Joseph's time, you still respected the way you were brought up. That's why the whole sequence of yes, papa, no, papa. And the dad's like, don't call me that. It'd be better if we had a better relationship. But they don't know how to do it. And it's all too late. It's all suffocated by the form that's been built up on this ideal. The ideal has gone beyond a true faith to a decadent, overly ornamented, traditional system of worship that's lost its value and no one accepts anymore. It's a sad thing, really. There was a little bit I thought was interesting when Carl Joseph actually goes to Galicia. I can't remember the actual name of the town he goes to. Now, if I can find it, there is almost a hideous foreboding of writing. And there's many other things I could talk about, but here it is. Oh, what a piece of writing. Right. When the soldiers drilled back where he was, when he was in the Dragoons, you know, there was a certain charm about it all. And you had the bands and all that kind of stuff. When he goes to the extremities up against the Russian border, which I find interesting because they get on with the Russian soldiers at their outposts. They share things. Of course, that's all going to go in World War One, isn't it? They're going to shoot each other and kill each other. A bit like Max Demand and Tattenberg had to kill each other for the honour of their country or their regiment. Exactly what's going to happen in the Second World War. People who knew each other would kill each other. But I think it's chapter 8. Oh, I've gone and lost it now. I had it right there. Yes, here it is. Describing how the environment they were in when he moves to the infantry. He says, there too, the soldiers, bottom of page 141, if you've got that edition. There too, the soldiers drilled as they did in all the other garrisons, the length and breadth of the empire. Every day, the Jaeger battalion marched back to barracks with grey mud on their boots. Now, as we read this, what does the image remind you of? Okay, what comes to your mind? Major Zoglar rode up ahead. Lieutenant Trotter led the second platoon of the first company. The tempo in which they marched was set by a broad, mannerly signal from the horn player, not the exuberant fanfare that a raid interrupted and played around the hoof taps of the dragoons' mounts. Carl Joseph was now on foot, and he imagined he felt better for it. All around him, the nailed boots of the Jaegers crunched on the jagged little ballast pebbles that repeatedly, as often as once a week in springtime, were sacrificed to the swampy tracks on the insistence of the military authorities. All those stones, those millions of stones, were swallowed up by the insatiable road. And ever new, victorious silver-grey shining layers of mud were churned up from the depths, ate up the stones and cement, and smacked together over the stamping boots of the soldiers. Wouldn't you just love to be able to write one paragraph like that in your life? What did it remind you of? Did any particular image come to mind? I'm only waiting in case someone wants to say before I do. Well, I'll say what I think. What did World War I look like as far as a war went? Wars used to be glorious. The dragoon officers used to think and talk of war, of honour. Carl Joseph he dreamt, didn't he? He imagined, daydreamed his death, a glorious death. Maybe cut by a sabre and he's bleeding over the epaulets. How do these guys look? Notice first, the music that is played is not like that of the dragoons. It's not the Radetzky march. this noble, vigorous tune of empire. In fact, I'll tell you how to think of the Radetzky March. It's like the Marseillaise of empire. Marseillaise, of course, that liberty, the tune of liberty. That Radetzky is the tune of conservatism. These aren't going to the Radetzky March. It's a much more sullen march. That says a lot. The idea of militarism is not looked forward to now. But mud is what comes up. Now, what were the battlefields of World War One like? Mud. They were blown to pieces. Trenches were dug in the Eastern Front as well as the West, not as many nor as extensive, but sort of entrenchment was something that everyone had to do because of the way the war was fought. The cavalry became almost insignificant during that war, except for pulling guns back and forward. The Radetzky March becomes insignificant. It is all infantry and artillery at this point. And then did you notice that you've got this swampy state, and the only way to march across it, to get across that swamp, is by putting on those pebbles. And it says as often as once a week in springtime. Just listen to how the pebbles are described again. It says the jagged little ballast pebbles that repeatedly, as often as once a week in springtime, were sacrificed. What an extraordinary word to use for a pebble. Were sacrificed to the swampy tracks on the insistence of the military authorities. All those stones, those millions of stones, were swallowed up by the insatiable road. That's World War One. How many lives were lost? Was it 11 million? I mean, that's extraordinary. That's probably more, almost close, maybe just shy of the amount of all deaths in all wars in all history previous to it. They were little pebbles trying to lay the path to victory, just sacrificed to the mud, no longer the glorious clothes. And when we go later into the gambling dens, what do the officers look like? They've all got their jackets off. They're all in shirt sleeves with the sleeves rolled up or swinging like ghosts, it says. No, this ideal of the military, of empire, is gone. It's about to be consumed. And this is what I just think Roth is brilliant here. He's just defining to us, obviously he's looking back at the past, but he went through the First World War. And he knows what these men, Karl Joseph's men, his friends, were going to go through. And he can bring that hue to the memory of the empire. And it's about to collapse. Now, of course, we haven't got there yet, but we can clearly see that through the family, through the three trotters, through Jacques as well, through Max Demant, the doctor who was his friend, anyone related to him, we can see that this is a family and story of a family who mirror the rise and fall of the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy. It was great. It had an ideal. It had its emperor picture, just like the Trotter family had its hero of Solferino, who they looked up to, who they imagined what would he do, who sort of dominated the family from the wall, from his picture. And then how it became bureaucratic through friends and just became a systematic sort of machinery that just kept moving but couldn't adjust. And then Karl Joseph is already beginning to deteriorate. He's already getting drunk, isn't he, with this 90 proof that they drink. He's just been sucked into the gambling dens. And he's miserable. Everything is beginning to grind down. And the way he describes that in his life, and knowing the history of World War One and what actually happened to these men, it's just, and not just the futility, the unbelievable, fated, irreversible direction that the times were taking, that no one wanted that war. And yet all of Europe ended stuck in it. Millions of people died for that. This fatedness. So what you get with Roth, if you agree with me, you can say, Roth remembers the glorious ideal. He remembers the good of the empire. He can see what was wrong with it. He almost senses that it was doomed to fail. But what he never puts his finger on is exactly why it failed. He doesn't know for sure why it failed. It's almost, his only answer is, they couldn't adjust, and fate seemed to have done for it. And what was so horrifying is that that empire went in 4 years flat. Even if Germany and Austro-Hungary had won the war, Austro-Hungary as an empire would have been gone. But it died. A whole empire and an ideal died in just 4 years. Nothing, not really anything collapses that fast. And so just briefly, a couple of you have already mentioned it sounds similar to things today. We've had the Vietnam, the disconnect with the two generations, and the questioning of the ideals of each side. What I find interesting, Roth was, I'm pretty sure, not talking about this at all, but it's curious when you bring a religious idea up, whether religious or not, whatever denomination, or whether you're humanist, atheist, agnostic, doesn't matter. That's not what I'm getting at here. But a lot of Western civilization, you can't deny, is built upon a fundamental ideal, what you would call the Christian ideal. And yet, hasn't it become very much the paraphernalia and the practices the just going through a lot of it? A lot of people are assigned onto the church's list as being born or christened, but how many actually hold to the ideal now? It's just more, a lot of it is for show. Not for everybody, some people are very devout, but from what it used to be. And do you sense Western civilization is in a crisis at the moment, because what it's actually built on, not many people are believing in anymore. Even those who claim a belief in God, for instance, may not submit to the idea of church ruling. And what I find very interesting reading something like this is the patterns in history. And there's sort of an unrest between a world that we know and a world that's coming. Because I think most people sense a big change is on the scene. And so are the institutions of old religion, are they able to adapt? You see them trying to adapt, but can they? I'm not commenting on one way or the other. This goes for everybody. There's a lot of thoughts up in the air. I talked to people from all denominations. I was talking to someone who's a humanist the other day, and they'd given up hope for the humanist ideal, which is sort of based on old Renaissance to ideas which also are influenced by the Christian ideal. That's up in the air. Thomas Hardy had this problem. He lost complete faith in the church, but he believed in human's progress. When he saw World War I break out, he died with the Habsburg monarchy, really, even though he was an Englishman, because he said, now is the time to take world rulership away from the white races and let someone else try, because he had lost hope in the great ideals that have been set up. So that's a remarkable thing about literature, is sometimes you find yourself almost glaring in a mirror. There's something similar. What are your thoughts? I'm not going to say any more because we've done an hour now. I know it says an hour 8, but we waited 8 minutes before we started. So that's what I got. These two chief ideas, these chief messages, are the demise of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the foreboding, the imminent war brooding on the horizon that will collapse everything and crush an empire. And secondly, what's that? Okay. Right, I will look that up. I do like Machado Giassis, absolutely brilliant. Dom Casimiro is probably next month, I'm reading that. And O Alienista, I think you said there. I'll look that one up because I like his writing. So yeah, collapse of monarchy, etc. But also the spiritual ideal. Maybe keep an eye out for that through the rest of the book. There is an ideal that's been lived up to that brought some wonders, that was glorious to look at, that may well have united the empire. But as philosophies change, so does the world. And I'm just looking forward to seeing how it keeps on working out. There's other things to be said about the constant use of red and black. It was Annette on our Instagram read-along, just made the comment that the roulette, it talks about the white circle of the ball surrounded by black and red fields, and she made the comment, Is this an allusion to the Nazi flag? Because Roth wrote it then and had to flee. And he remembered the monarchy of Austro-Hungary because at least it held Europe together, whereas it was just in complete dissolution by the 1930s. Everything was up in the air. But amazing, the difference of the attitudes of the two generations to each other compared to what would happen after the war, where you get the Jazz Age and the Flapper Age as a direct rebellion against the old standard of doing things, against honour, against propriety, against etiquette. All of that changed after the war because millions of pebbles had been consumed in the insatiable mud of the trenches. So I'll leave it there. What are your thoughts? And do you have any questions, or do you want to make an observation about the book, or do you just want to ask anything? Last time I stayed on for a little while to let anyone ask questions or talk about things. So I'm putting it over to you now. If you're in a rush to go, you can leave as well. I was asked if someone wanted to know if they could support me. If you do want to help me keep like regular ones of these going, lives, maybe doing almost like a book club, if you want to support me in that respect, I have a link in my last video to my page on what's called buymeacoffee.com. And in Buy Me a Coffee, you can just, it's basically a small donation of like $3, I think it is. And everything you put there just helps me towards my research, buying books, some of the equipment I need, and taking the time to piece all of this together out of my workday. So only if you want to. If you can't, that's fine. I'm more interested in you enjoying and talking about literature. But if you can contribute a little bit, that would also be okay. Hope you don't think I'm begging, because I'm not. All right. Any questions, anybody? Well, I didn't speak there for 10 seconds and someone logged on. Thank you, Artsy Tiger. I'm pleased you liked it. I wish I'd had the book and not the e-reader. I feel I could have really gotten so much more. Oh, I'm sorry, Myra. Yeah, it's hard because... Oh, well done, Marion. You've not even read it and you're here to listen to it. That's marvellous. Now, that's a true bookie, that is. When I say bookie, I don't mean someone who takes bets. I'm someone who's into books. I know what you mean, Myra. I wish I could be more accurate, but I can only say what chapter it's in. But, I mean, if you look back through a couple of these, or skip through this video, maybe, at a later point, you might be able to find some of the parts. Maybe that's a good idea. Okay, what I will do, it may not be right now, but I will try to put below this, I'll keep this on my YouTube channel, and I will maybe put references, so chapters and paragraph references to everything that I've talked about, so that you can go and look at it, especially that bit about the mud. That was just beautiful writing. All of chapter 7 was unbelievably allegorical of the beginning of World War One. Just, there was loads I could have said. It's just ever so hard to, on the fly, when I've got so much to go through, to find the bits I'm looking for. And I would love to have the time to prepare so carefully that I can have everything listed down, but it's just the amount of time that takes out of my day with my kids and work and everything. But maybe I'll get there at some point. Gaskell wrote a book, The Red and Black, The Yellow and Black. Is that like our reference to the Red and Black? Right. So, The Yellow and Black, I don't know the book. The Yellow and Black is often referred to regarding the dual monarchy, because the Habsburg monarchy's flag was yellow and black in a vertical lines. Stendhal, as Mary Ann has just said, Stendhal writes the book The Red and the Black, or The Scarlet and Black. That is a significantly important piece of literature. what's that, 1831, I think that was written. And that's interesting because that's the French perspective. I've done an in-depth review of The Red and the Black by Stendhal, but if you're going to read The Red and the Black, I'll give you a heads up. It's not the most luxurious read. It's not like the quickest read. But listening to your comments, Mari, you like to dig anyway. But it's quite a slow, almost mundane story. I loved it. But what I'll say is that book ties up in the last 4 pages in such an amazing way. It's just, and what you've got, actually, you've made a good point here. In Stendhal's Red and Black, I'm sure. Yeah, I know what you mean, Marion. I don't blame anyone giving up on Stendhal, Red and the Black, because it's slow going. But what was so interesting about Stendhal's message in that book was the mediocrity of French society. How the mediocre had become in charge of everything. The only way to advance was not to be brilliant because people would pull you down. You had to be mediocre. And there's an interesting comment in the Radetzky March, in chapter 12, actually, where it says of the officers that they'd come to, oh God, what are the exact words? It's just a tiny little remark it is. Maybe it's chapter 11 then. I know roughly on what part of the page it is. Nope, looks like I'm not going to find it. Never mind. It says about the officers that they had come to, by their training in the military, they had come to a great mediocrity. And that's amazing that you mentioned The Red and the Black, because this was the big problem, as far as Stendhal could see, with the French setup. The mediocrity was stifling everything. And I suppose you could say in the Habsburg monarchy, which, let's face it, hand in glove with the French a lot of the time. I know they started fighting, but there was a close link between the two monarchies, powers. The Peter Principle. Remind me of what that is. But yeah, Europe was in the same sort of thrall. And so mediocrity suffocates. As you can see in this, mediocrity suffocates society. There is an ideal to live up to, but no one's really right at the pinnacle of it. That's gone. It's a bygone age. And no one's adjusting. They just do what is expected of them. Look at France when Jacques doesn't turn up with his letters. It's like his world ended. He couldn't cope with his letters not being on the table. He couldn't perceive a world outside of that. And so that's interesting. I hadn't really pulled up that idea. I'd noticed mediocrity in this, but I'd not thought of Stendhal's Red and Black. And Julien Sorel, the main character, his reaction to that mediocrity right at the end actually is very reminiscent. Yeah, everyone's promoted to his level of incompetence. Yes. Okay, yeah. I know exactly what you mean now. It's so true as well. Yeah, I don't know what happened with Franz Joseph, though. He was far higher than his level of incompetence. Except, I suppose, it's where you're born, isn't it, for him? But Julien Sorel in The Red and the Black, remarkably, his reaction is ultimately the same reaction as the hero of Solferino. His reaction to truth and the life he would like to have is very similar to Julien Sorel's. Interesting. I've not really connected the dots before, but yeah, appreciate that one. Well done. And yeah, by all means read Stendhal, but just know it's one of those books a lot of people read to say they've read it, rather than to enjoy it. It's, if you're reading it for a yarn, read something else. But I think it's worth it in the end, because the end of the book is fabulous. Okay. Right, well, I don't know if anyone else has got anything to say, share, ask. Does anyone feel like they would like to carry on? You don't have to answer this. I don't fear you're going to upset me, but carry on. Like, potentially, if I can do it, do you want a monthly book club kind of thing, which you can let others in? Because if you do, I'll happily see what I can do to arrange it. I may even be able to drag some other YouTubers in and talk about it, but just let me know in the comments below or on my Instagram. So definitely, okay, that's good. Thank you, Marianne. Please, I enjoy doing this with you guys, actually. I just feel really bad that I get to talk more than everybody else. Feels wrong somehow. I mean, there's potentially, I'd have to think about that, but potentially Zoom could work. Everyone could talk there. But yeah, and if there's any particular books, again, maybe I should make a video for that specifically. Yes, well done, Myra. Yes, I did leave it to the last moment, didn't I? I think it was February 2nd I released the video. Anyone want to read along with the Radetzky March? Okay, I will let you know very shortly what it will be. I'll pick one. Here's a question. Since you were all the ones who are here first, please, by all means, if you know other people who love books, share my channel and tell them that there's going to be a live and a read along and everything. So a lot of people do like read alongs, and then I'll arrange something. But since you're here first, would you rather a 20th century or a 19th century classic? And is there a particular country you would want it from? Okay, Marion, I will keep you posted of what we're doing. I'm just thinking of a good book to go along with. There's a lot of good books out there. I've got shed loads. I'm looking at all my shelves now, thinking which one could we go for. Anyway, I will definitely pick one, or I'll put it to a poll on Instagram maybe, or on YouTube. I know I can do polls on YouTube. I haven't actually worked out how to, but maybe you can help me with that, Marion. And then we can pick next month's book. Yeah, so many books. You ain't kidding. There's too many. I wish I had more time. And of course, when you think about it, you can't even speed read because I stop every 4 lines to write something down that's got my attention. Okay, well, there you go. I thank you so much, everybody, for joining and sticking around. I think you're all wonderful, and I mean that. I'm not just saying it. I think you're all cracking. I've enjoyed doing this with you, and I hope I can improve it and get better each time so that it's more enjoyable for you guys. And if you come up with any suggestions, you think how I could improve, throw them my way. You will not upset me, I promise. I'm a big boy, I can take it. So yeah, I wish you... thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Adele. Really good to have you both with us. Connecticut and Morocco. Oh, Barbie Blue, thank you. It's very inspiring listening to you. That's lovely. Aren't you lovely, Barbie Blue? Where are you from, Barbie Blue? Thank you, Myra. And you're magnificent. I was just wondering where Barbie Blue was from. Luxembourg. Ah, yes, you were on last week. Okay. Oh, wonderful. You know, not very often one meets a person from Luxembourg. It used to be my favourite country when I was little. Never been there, but because the capital is the same as the country. Like Luxembourg. I am right, aren't I? Luxembourg is the capital of Luxembourg. You're from Texas. Yes, I remember you being from Texas, Myra. Whoa. And there's me always thought, I think you were saying the weather weren't good last week. There's me always thinking Texas is gloriously sunny all year round. Mind you, you had the big freeze, didn't you, last year? Was it Texas that had the freeze? I think, well, it was somewhere in America, had a chronic freeze over. I remember seeing it on the news. What's really funny is I've sort of finished and there's still more people coming on. If you're just coming on, we've finished. But feel free to go back and watch it all again. Also, 18, England. Lovely. Which part of England? Oh, York, yes, the freeze. Which part of England, Edel? I'm in Wales. Pembrokeshire, far, far west. As far as you can go, right against the sea. But I come from the Midlands originally. Right. Okay, everybody. So pleased you all came. Tell others to feel free to join in as well. Although it may not be worth their while the next 2 weeks because it's Radetzky March and we're already halfway through. But get people ready for the month after. I'll let you know very soon what that book will be so we can all get it ahead of time. And yeah, see you soon, Myra. See you, Adele. See you, Marion, if you're still on. See you, Barbie Blue, if you're still on. And everybody else who I can't remember all your names. I'll see you shortly. And until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.